All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the webinar today. We're very excited to have our panel of experts here. We're going to be talking today about attracting, training, and retaining manufacturing talent with new technology. I'm excited to introduce our panel. We'll start with Rebecca Kowalski. Rebecca is the Vice President of Manpower Manufacturing. Rebecca's work focuses on developing solutions that help organizers and leaders deal with the implications of both the shortage of rightly skilled workers and the evolution of roles and skills. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Next up, we have Luke Monk from Deloitte. He is a senior manager in Deloitte's manufacturing practice with a background in human capital. Luke designs and delivers the operating model and organizational design, talent, and change management solutions that business transformations require to be successful. Luke, excited to have you here.
Thanks much.
Next, we have Arthur Wheaton. Arthur is the Director of Labor Studies and works in the Cornell International Labor Relations Buffalo CoLab. His expertise includes workplace training, negotiations, costing out of contract, and conflict resolution, as well as auto and aerospace industrial relations. Art, excited to have you.
Thank you very much.
And finally, we have Dr. Prasad Akella. He is the founder and chairman of Drishti. Prasad is a serial entrepreneur. He's created 3 massive categories by envisioning and commercializing deep tech products that empower humans in 3 very different areas: robotics, business social networks, and computer vision/AI. Prasad is a fellow of the SME and ASME. Prasad, great to see you again.
I'm looking forward to the session. It's very important to the industry and to Drishti.
Today's session will be moderated by Gary Jackson, the CEO of Drishti. Before I turn it over to Gary, I'd like to just do a couple of quick housekeeping notes. This session will be recorded and will be available on demand after the live session wraps up. We'll be emailing that out to you. Feel free to share that to any of your colleagues. If you have a question, we will be fielding questions at the end of the session. Just drop them into the Q&A and we'll make sure to get to as many as we can. With that, Gary, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Erin. So again, I'm Gary Jackson. I'm the CEO of Drishti. I have the privilege of working with Dr. Akella and with Erin. And one of the talent areas that we explored prior to this session launching was the relative talent of our respective football teams. So we'll hold that one aside at the moment and focus on manufacturing. So we all know that manufacturing jobs are changing. And at the same time, we're facing a shortage of rightly skilled talent. So is there something that manufacturers can do to differentiate from other industries like retail, warehousing, et cetera, to become a net talent attractor? Rebecca?
Thanks for the question, Gary, because this is important. And I would say for too long, we've communicated manufacturing careers and left talent to interpret what exactly we mean when we say manufacturing career. I would posit to this audience that we would never market our products that carelessly. We study our consumers, their preferences, and then we carefully construct marketing campaigns and reinforce key messaging along the way, and we guide perception. But we don't do the same thing with talent. And so left to their own devices, they may have radically different interpretations of what manufacturing actually means. And that's very dependent on their family and friends' context. And we need to become better storytellers. I get this question a lot of times in the context of whether or not we need to pursue a national marketing campaign to remake manufacturing. And I think that there is certainly a lot to that. But my question for this audience is, how are you telling your story? Manufacturing is fundamentally about making and creating. And are you leading with messages that actually make that clear? Are you driving home the point of how what you make and produce actually makes the world a better place? We know from our research at Manpower Group around what workers want, that talent is looking for those kinds of messages. They're also looking at the how. So the how really matters. Messages that are really resonating right now have to do with sustainability, which is very hot. Your mission matters to talent, and they will come and stay to support a mission. If you're on a journey to make process and product more sustainable, tell that story. In addition to talking about how what you make makes the world a better place. Make sure that incoming talent knows that you need them to meet your goals and objectives, and you have the opportunity to really enlist them in a mission. Another point is not to lead so much with the manufacturing, but rather with things that the talent is telling us that they care about. And this is also important because your competition for talent doesn't look like it did before. We know that manufacturing is more high-tech, more digital than ever before. There are so many jobs related to the cybersecurity of the manufacturing enterprise, the more digital manufacturing enterprise, the more sustainable manufacturing enterprise. So think about who else is interested in those kinds of missions. Consider that high-tech companies are also direct competitors for talent that you just assumed would come and stay and work for you. So consider that as a competitive threat, certainly, but also an opportunity for widening your talent pool. Just one other thing, Gary, here on the mission. We know family and wellness are priorities. We know that flexibility is a priority. It comes up in the research all the time. But another thing that comes up is the opportunity to develop and maintain their skill set. People know that manufacturing is changing. They know that jobs and skills are evolving. How are you marketing that experience? How are you marketing the career pathway and the upskilling opportunities that you offer? How are you testing that? How are you pivoting that message? Much the same way you would if you were in marketing at a CPG company, right? How you talk about what they can do inside of your organization and how you partner with them on that career journey really makes a difference. It comes up in every demographic that the opportunity to upskill and build a career can be a difference maker in choosing to stay with you or choosing you in the first place. So those are some starting thoughts for your audience.
And I'll just share a personal anecdote. So your point about telling a story really strikes home for me. My mother worked in a factory the whole time I was growing up. And I can remember going into a grocery store and her pointing out to me a display cabinet, which is the product that their company would make, and telling me with pride how important that was, both for the local economy, but also the fact that she could see her product live and in the field. And that actually stayed with me throughout my life, the pride that she had in that manufacturing job.
Harnessing mission and pride are hugely powerful, and that's a great story, Gary. Awesome.
So Luke, when we spoke with others from Deloitte a few months back, they made the point that manufacturing has a perception problem. I obviously had a positive perception about manufacturing. I might not have come to work for Drishti, but in Drishti's recent survey of entry-level workers across industries, the statement was somewhat corroborated. We asked folks with no prior manufacturing experience what they thought was appealing about assembly work. And sadly, 33% literally said nothing. So how do you suggest manufacturers overcome this issue? What role does new technology play?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Gary. And, sometimes manufacturing is referred pejoratively, right, as like dumb, dirty, and dangerous. Or at least that has been like the stigma that I think a lot of our clients are trying to battle. And I'll say something, I thought Rebecca's points were really well taken in terms of helping prospective candidates in the workforce understand the importance of manufacturing, not only to our economy, but really to kind of like society in general, how all these products really make the world a better place. I think that is table stakes for this discussion. But at the root of your question, Gary, I think is an acknowledgement that manufacturing truly is changing, right? So what you used to do in a work center around, what might have been a kind of low cognitive complexity, very repetitive task with regard to assembly something, has really become the exception and not the rule. We see through the advent of technology, and I'll kind of double click into smart factory technology, the really expansion of manufacturing jobs and the kind of the blowing away of traditional functional silos, so that I might be a production operations person, but I need to understand engineering, and I need to understand supply chain, and I need to understand IT, and I may be called upon I will indeed be called upon to build the Boolean logic that's going to kind of fuel the AI that's going to, be at the heart of our smart factory. So we really see the roles expanding. And I'll give you an illustrated example just very quickly. When we think about smart factory, one of the classic use cases will be a predictive quality use case, right? So based on the sensor data that's coming off of the machines, I can tell that the machine's going to start producing quality escapes. Well, traditionally my role was just to stay at that center and kind of let WIP inventory work through. Now, my responsibility is to take that machine out of service, to reroute WIP inventory elsewhere through the factory to make sure we meet our production goals, et cetera. We've expanded that job significantly. And now it's a cognitively complex job. And what's really interesting is as automation begins to take things that can be described as Boolean logic and things that are kind of rote or repetitive away, what's left, the nucleus of the job that's left is what we call at Deloitte inherently human, right? And our research shows that those are the motivating jobs, right? Things that only people can do. So really, I think that technology is going to, and our data has begun to show this, if marketed correctly, really is a driver for a renaissance in American manufacturing and really kind of drawing people back to those manufacturing careers.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Prasad, do you want to comment on the
Yeah, I was
perception
just going
issue?
to comment. I was just going to comment on your mother's experience in the plant. So I've spent large parts of my life on the plant floor, and I get goosebumps every time I walk into that plant. I think of it as a ballet because it takes some serious thinking, planning, and orchestration to make that line run flawlessly. And it takes those machines and those humans that Luke spoke about. So what I think personally excites kids is if you can show them that orchestration, you can show them the tech that you just spoke about, Luke, and you tell those stories like Rebecca was talking about. I think that's how you get them there. And then you got to keep them then, which is the career planning part, which is a whole different conversation you can have. But it just seems like there's just such a rich environment there that we should be able to do something good with it.
Art, do you want to comment?
I would think some of the perceptions have changed greatly over the years for what manufacturing is. So I agreed with Luke. If you talked to somebody 10 or 15 years ago and you told your parents, you told your mom, I'm going to go work in a factory, you would get a lot of thumbs down from all the guidance counselors. I think one of the important things, as Rebecca was talking about, is you have to have the mission of the product that you're building, but more importantly, you have to be prideful of being able to go to that place of work. So it has to have the flexibility, has to have the pay and benefits. And it was considered a fantastic job working for the traditional auto sector for so many years because it meant you could afford to buy a car, you could afford to have a house. You were seen as a catch or a good person that was there because you have a stable environment. And I think that kind of fell out of favor as well as people started downsizing. So I think to be attractive, you have to be making a good product and having it be a good place to work and being able to identify why it's a good place to work. And flexibility in these days is important as well. But great question.
Can I just tack on one thing that your comments reminded me of, which is, it may become more important now for us to lead with the how things are accomplished. So why aren't we showing the ballet, as Prasad described? As Luke discussed, the smart factory, why are we not showcasing that? If you're going to create that pride that Art was talking about, you have to have some sort of nexus for pulling it all together. And one of the things we know from, Gen Z and millennials is they're interested in high-tech jobs. What are we doing to show those generations this is the convergence of high-tech and maker movement, right? Two things that they care very, very much about. How do we showcase that? They're not afraid of robots. They're not afraid of digital technologies. That's all native soil for them. And so how do we help them understand this is where you go if you want to be a practitioner in high tech? I think that's going to be really crucial to the storytelling.
How you use a robot is very different than how you design a robot, and how you use it is just as hard and sophisticated as designing in the first place.
Absolutely. And you can even imagine showing them both.
You know, I had the privilege of visiting the smart factory that Deloitte set up in Wichita, Kansas. And in the airport in Wichita, there are not only billboards, but live videos showing what's going on in that smart factory. And I can tell you that during the time that I left that factory, it became very obvious to me how many people were standing around watching that video. And I can imagine that if we were able to get that kind of video into the high schools and secondary schools to really gain an appreciation for what modern manufacturing looks like, I would think that would have an impact on perception.
Gary, if I may, I just wanted to kind of wrap up the smart factory conversation, because I love Prasad's analogy. My PhD is in industrial psychology, right? And there was a concept back in the day called task identification, right? That I really had an ownership of the task and the outputs of the task. What I think is really powerful about the smart factory is that it gives ownership for the whole ballet, right? You become the conductor of the ballet much more than you had historically kind of sitting in an individual work center. So I find it really energizing that folks were looking at that video, because I think the video really gets you excited about, like, I can take ownership of everything this factory does and the synchronization of all these pieces. And really, I am a critical piece of the puzzle that gets that product out the door. I think it's such a powerful message. I think it's really exciting.
Thank you. So shifting slightly. So one of the issues we hear a lot about, both from our customers and from industry surveys, is it deals with the training and onboarding of staff. So once you have the right people in place, you need to equip them to do the job well. And Prasad, I know you've been a fierce advocate for video-based training for the past several years. Can you articulate what it is that makes video training so much more robust than other training modalities or styles?
Yeah, happy to. I think you just laid the groundwork for that when you said people were standing around in the airport looking at the video coming off the floor. And before, as we were starting, you were talking about your favorite quarterback. So, when that quarterback throws an interception, what does the guy do? He runs off, sits on the bench, and watches an instant replay. What's he really doing? He's analyzing, what was the play we designed, what is the play we ran, and why did I land up with the ball in the other guy's hands, right? And so I think this is really the power of video. So if I break the problem up into two parts, the first part is the importance of training. And the second is the importance of a feedback loop in the training process. And so Toyota, the lean guys, have mastered this whole idea of driving home the importance of standardized work. Because if you've got the foundation in place, then whether it's productivity or quality or safety, all of them work their way from there. But they've done that in the absence of video. And I think what video really, really, really transforms is this personalized feedback loop. So it's me throwing a ball that somebody else caught. It's not about anybody else, it's about me. And now the question is, if I can see what I'm doing wrong, and I can see this in a very accessible mode called a video play, where there's no language, nothing, it's just raw video, me and understanding it. Suddenly you get a massive lift in understanding and changing behavior. And that is why I'm such a big, call me a fierce advocate. Yes, I'll take that up gladly as a title. And we've seen this in the plant floor with our customers. Some of them report reduction of training time by 50%. So imagine you got a 30% annual churn. You're spending 6 weeks training a guy coming in, knowing full well that 48 weeks later, a third of them are gone. Now, instead, you can shrink that time and you can shrink the number of defects that they introduce. At the same time, you're now in a very different place. I think that's what video-based training can do for all of us. And that's what drives me.
Terrific. Other comments on the importance of or impact of video training? Art.
I think video training is an important add-on for training, but I don't think relying exclusively on video is the answer. That if it becomes passive where you're watching the video, I think a big part of what Prasad was talking about was you're actually engaged with the video, talking about it, describing it, and it's a moderated video, then it's okay. But I think they have to see where they fit in that process. And that's why they have other folks to interact with. So I think it can be a mistake to rely exclusively on all video-based training. I think you need to have a moderator where the participant can engage with that and interact with that to see where they fit within that video.
Actually, I think Art, I didn't frame my statement up correctly. Maybe I should correct it. My working assumption is what Drishti does is the video analyzes you doing your job, just like it analyzes the guy throwing the ball. So in fact, this becomes even more real time and even more personalized. Like every ball you throw is being analyzed, which is different than actually having a bunch of guys critiquing you, which oftentimes doesn't go over too well. So I think it is this feedback. When I talk about feedback loop, I'm talking about every single cycle that you work on, you actually can get feedback, which is about the highest resolution of feedback you can get. And it's one-on-one, it's just you and the machine, there's no other human being involved. That's what makes it more attractive from a consumption perspective. But you're absolutely right, it is in an environment, it's not the only answer.
But Art, let me ask you to expand on that, because I know you're familiar with the objections that workers have about new technology, including cameras on the line and the issues of privacy. So what do you think is the basis of that hesitation, and how can manufacturers help overcome or alleviate those concerns in pursuing elevating the performance of the plant and pursuing the individual's performance for everyone's benefit? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I had an opportunity to see a few videos for what Drishti does for their designs, and I see that they have eliminated many of the objections that I would come up with. One, it's not geared towards reprimanding or discipline. So it's a matter of trying to improve quality and improve, the working conditions and improving the throughput for quantity being able to go through. So that's fine if the video monitoring is all about the production and the quality and making it a better work environment where you're changing the working conditions to remove bottlenecks, then I don't think there is many objections. And the video also didn't show anybody's faces. It wasn't about trying to catch somebody doing something wrong. It was a way of verifying the production and verifying the quality that all of the steps were followed. I think when it's linked to some sort of adverse impact on their job, if they're being monitored, oh, you screwed up here, now that's one ding against your record, or here you missed that, that's not good. You missed 10 steps, you're fired. Those types of things are highly objectionable to the workforce. You don't want to feel like Big Brother is watching your every move, trying to say, we got you. I think there's a distinct difference when it's designed directly about the steps in the process. And I'm sure Luke is aware of the smart tools where you have that the tool will show a green light, yellow light, or red light based on it on an andon cord or andon system. So the tool automatically shows you a digital display that, yes, you did it correctly. The right amount of torque, yes, you did that. And I think the high resolution video that Drishti uses seems to make that even clearer for what was going on. And it had a printout step-by-step showing you, here's the step, yes, completed. I think if it's there to assist your job, then it's great. If it's there to critique your job or have the potential for discipline, then I think that's where the workforce can get very uncomfortable and try to resist it.
Art, I really well said. And I think our client experience with Drishti and similar tools bears that out. But I really see Drishti and video-based learning as part of the continued erosion between training and work that we're seeing, right? We're starting to see these two things blend together. And for anyone who's ever lived through an ERP implementation, right? You used to go to training and like you would learn all your transactions, right? Now we have solutions like WalkMe, for example, where you're learning in the flow of work. And I think that Drishti and solutions like augmented reality are part of this learning in the flow of work that's really an important part of both kind of skills maintenance and also support for the continued transformation of individual manufacturing tasks, right? So like you will likely get some sort of formal training as you enter a manufacturing environment. But we're seeing the work centers evolve so quickly that a solution like Drishti to give real-time performance management support in a developmental, not a punitive way, we see as being a really important part of fueling things like smart manufacturing or the smart factory.
I want to just pile on here for a moment because this is how learning gets done well, when you can eliminate that gap, Luke, that you just described, where I'm sitting in one place, I'm learning something, and then I'm applying it at some distant point in the future, as opposed to learning in place. So I think it speeds those cycles, but there's something else that I think is kind of fun. The younger generations, and that's how we know we're old, by the way, we start referring to the quote unquote younger generations, they like gamification. They like videos. They subscribe to things like Twitch, where they watch each other play video games. Yes, I see Luke nodding. Maybe are you a subscriber or are you related to someone who's a subscriber, Luke?
I have a subscriber living in my home, Rebecca.
Yes, exactly, right? And so this is what they're used to. They're used to the technology giving them transparency. They're used to a faster feedback loop. You are correct. They don't want it to be punitive. Who would? I mean, that's the creepy Skynet. That's, robots are taking over the world, as opposed to, I am used to having technology assist me. I want to be able to look at my phone for the answers. Well, I can't look at my phone on the line. The fact that I've got this loop flowing through, and we have the digital technologies to, shorten that time between learning and application, and then shorten the time in terms of continuous improvement. I mean, who has the time these days to go through a fishbone diagram, go through some sort of causation, multifactorial analysis? No, just tell me now. By the way, they don't have any patience for that, but they'll look at that replay from 5 different angles. And if you, by the way, I'll talk about this a little bit later, but if you can actually make that almost a contest, across teams to see who can get closest to optimal, now you're speaking their language. Tokenization, games, medals, cheering crowds in the background. That is what they like. And so, there is that very, very clear point at which you have to be careful to not go into the punitive. But if you can move into the celebration and the speed of training, the speed to offer value, you can get rid of those archaic notions of it takes 3 to 5 years to actually do something meaningful around here and actually have a faster speed to productivity and a faster path to success for the individual. So I just wanted to weigh in on that, because I think we sometimes miss that demographic is looking for that kind of technology to help them.
I love that. Art, you had a follow-up?
Yeah, I just forgot one very important critical aspect that the video training can help with, or the visual watching them, is for health and safety, so that it's in their interest, so that watching how you're doing things is like, it's fine that if you're screwing up products and you cost the company some money, but you don't want to cost yourself a finger or an arm. And this equipment can hurt you if you're not doing it properly. So you have a lot of legitimate reasons for people to be engaged in this process for health and safety, which helps both the company and the employees to do it safely. So I just wanted to, that's what makes it a little different than a video game for Twitch, is that your performance and celebration is fine, but I'd really like to have all the employees go home with all their fingers and toes.
100%.
You actually reminded me of a fantasy that I have. And the fantasy is this, that someday the labor unions will step up and say, we insist that you have video data available for all of our workstations, not only for purposes of health and safety, but for purposes of our being able to assess the relative contribution that our members are making in the factory environment. We've talked a lot about, the impact on the manufacturer, the impact on the worker, but there's a third party involved here. I don't mean to get off on too much of a tangent, but you reminded me of that, Art. Any thoughts on that? How we engage the unions?
Well, I think it can be engaging the unions or just engaging the workforce. I think it happens more often in a unionized environment because the employees feel empowered with some protections of a collective bargaining agreement to express their difference opinions, whereas in a non-unionized environment, they may not be willing to express those differences. And I think the unions are willing to engage in things that improve the workplace, not necessarily trying to speed up to try to maximize the profits for the company, but to try to have a good place to work, improve the quality, because the unions absolutely want to do anything they can to make the company more profitable, as long as they can share in the profits and benefit from the profits. So as long as they are engaged, and we're asking you, and I think Prasad had a fantastic point saying there's a difference between designing the robots and actually running those or working with those robots. And you have to tap into that knowledge base of the workers. And the union gives them an avenue to help in that process with a feeling of, yes, I can speak up because I have some mechanisms in place to protect me if things go wrong. But I think there will be support for the videos when it's implemented in the right way. And the union has to be involved in that implementation to make sure that some of their concerns are addressed up front. One story was Ford Motor Company, as they were moving to the Ford production system, which is modeled after the Toyota production system, was the CEO, William Clay Ford Jr., says, absolutely no Ford employee will lose their job because of an improvement for the lean production. You have to have a way to put people into work. They may change their job, what they're actually doing at which task, but their employment is guaranteed. And if you can find ways to reduce the number of people in that process, you better be ready to have other work or tasks available so they transition into a newer or more exciting or more skill building activity. So if the union's involved with it and it's not seen as a reprimand, but a way of helping to boost their skill level, and Rebecca mentioned that as well, being able to climb up the ladder or multi-skill or multitask, then I think that's fine. So the best bet is trying to engage with the workers, and if there is a union, engage with a union to get their perspective, because it's a different view from the engineer who designed it and the person who has to work with it, and their job depends on working with it and it working properly.
Yeah, I see that as our responsibility. And Luke, you've written about the skills gap in manufacturing and the kind of pervasive problem of tribal knowledge that's lost when people leave or retire. I visited some of our customers in Japan a few weeks ago, and I heard something during this trip that I don't think I have heard in the 30 years that I've been visiting operations in Japan, which is a real concern that as the older workers are retiring, they're not replacing them with enough enthusiasm from the younger crowd coming in. So I'm wondering, manufacturers are obviously clamoring ways to preserve the knowledge, but to avoid losing that tribal knowledge. What strategies do you advise for manufacturers to use to avoid that situation?
No, Gary, it's a great question. And, we talked a lot about the retirement tsunami for, the past 20 years, but we are seeing kind of what that actually is going to look like. And it always surprises me when I go to my clients that make the most sophisticated products in the world, and I realize that a lot of that knowledge of how to put together that fighter jet or that incredibly complex machine is in the minds of somebody who's been working that line for 30 years. And when that person leaves, we may very well not be able to, make that component of that product, et cetera. So basically the generational knowledge transfer that our clients are facing is a very real problem. But in some ways, the seeds of the solution are in the problem, right? So like what we have are our clients who are trying to motivate and engage a bimodal workforce, right? A bunch of people who are really close to retirement, want to contribute in the last kind of years that they have in the enterprise, and a group of folks who are entering the workforce are maybe not as keen to kind of wait their turn for them to kind of work through the bureaucracy to really have that task identification. Well, good news. We need them kind of contributing on the front lines right now. And one of the best solutions, the most elegant solution, was really pretty low tech. We are seeing a return to kind of old school mentorship and apprenticeship programs in our manufacturing clients, but with a twist, and enabled by technology. So when I think about these apprenticeship programs, Gary, maybe you've worked at, at wherever. I'm making up, these are not my clients, but Raytheon or Lockheed doing something really kind of sophisticated and complex, and I come in as your apprentice. You're teaching me the ropes. You are in real time dictating standard work to me, and maybe I'm using technology to capture that standard work for the first time. And oh, by the way, a solution like Drishti allows me to look at your videos of like how best in class, happens from an assembly perspective. So it's a really interesting kind of combination of a low tech concept of old school apprenticeship, but with this technology kicker, we found to be a really kind of nice solution that some of our clients are leveraging. And I'd be interested, Art and Rebecca, if you've seen kind of similar solutions in this space.
I had an opportunity before I came to Cornell to work at MIT with Lean Aerospace. So I actually did visit some of those companies that you talked about. And an example I can come up with was that Boeing Rocketdyne, where they were making engines for the space shuttle. They said, yeah, if I screw up this one little drill hole here, it's only about $1 million mistake because it was made out of pure titanium. So the cost for a very minor screw up is huge, so that you do have to pass that on. I think one of the issues Japan is having is their demographics of having an aging entire population. They don't have that same new crowd coming in. But having studied the US and Japanese labor relations, I think the philosophy is very different for Japan, where it's seen as the worker is important, their viewpoint is important, and we need to value that. And it was not always translated by all of the manufacturing companies in the US that want to pick and choose some of the system and not all of the system. And that can be dangerous. The original term for lean production was actually fragile production. So it can be very high tech, high performing, but that means you have a very small tolerance for screwing it up. And when you start messing with those workers and what they're doing and not valuing their opinions, you're putting bottlenecks in place that don't need to be there. So I think the more you can engage the workforce saying, don't check your brain at the door, we need you fully engaged to try to help make this a better product and a better place to work. I think that's the key. And if you can get that message across where we really care about our product, and if you can help us improve the product or the process, we want to listen to you. That's not always the case in manufacturing. And
No,
for the apprenticeship, the big thing that I'm aware of in the places that I've been is make sure you have a very diverse apprenticeship. We don't do a very great job of females in the workplace, people of LGBTQ plus in the workplace. We don't have as forgiving an environment in many of these manufacturing facilities as we should. So encouraging a more diverse pool of apprentices will also help your workplace as well. But go ahead, Gary, I cut you off.
No, I mean, I think what Luke and you said about the issue of apprenticeship and mentorship adding to job satisfaction. Again, I've been able to observe through my family members that are union electricians and gone through the whole process of becoming a journeyman electrician is a lesson in building a brotherhood. It's a lesson in building a community that starts from the ground up. And so, Rebecca, I'm curious, in addition to the points that Luke and Arthur made about job satisfaction, mentorship, et cetera, what are other things that you're seeing, especially in the manual assembly, manufacturing world, that, it's hard to recognize good performers if you don't have this sort of structured approach to measuring them through an apprenticeship program? Aside from Drishti, the analytics don't usually exist to highlight. when good work is being performed consistently well. So how do you recommend companies identify and retain the best performers, in the absence of some of this information?
Well, the first step would be to recognize that recognition matters, right? And it matters to everyone, all roles, all tenures, all skill levels inside of an organization. And it's always mattered, right? We know that as human beings, we would like recognition. We want to know what good performance looks like. Most people don't show up to work wondering how they can do a bad job. But right now, it matters even more particularly because of everything we discussed. We're in an era of skill scarcity versus abundance. So we have to retain and retrain talent as we move through these different levels of technological maturity. And that's one of the first things. If you were not necessarily paying attention to recognition before, do it for no other reason than there is no outside help coming, right? We are not producing enough rightly skilled talent externally, in the labor market. You have to shop from your own closet first and really recognize that talent is fundamentally the most renewable resource we have. You are correct. It can certainly be hard to recognize top performers in a data-based way. That's particularly true. One of my observations is anytime there is a long distance between career and pay levels as measured by the talent. So if that's the primary way in which efforts are recognized, you're pretty much destined to lose the talent. And let me tell you what I mean by as measured by talent. Organizationally, we say, hey, well, after a year, you get to this level or this pay grade, and after 2 years, after 3 years, after 4 years. That is not a very modern mindset, right? It's also not super helpful when you consider the pace of technological change and how quickly we need people to acquire new skills. So we have to really understand, I mentioned before, this gaming world, particularly for younger talent, they're used to literally that dopamine hit of leveling up, tokenized recognition. And even those that are not gamers, I'm not a gamer, but we still have similar expectations. You get a dopamine hit from likes or a text reply, right? And at the same time, companies are really maxed, stressed, and stressed. They can't get the talent they need. And paradoxically, they're maybe not paying as much attention to the relationship between recognition and retention. So acknowledgement can be pretty scarce, and it can be confusing to measure accomplishment. One of the things that we've done with our associate population around the world is introduce a program, we call it My Path, that provides badging and medaling opportunities for performance on assignments, as well as for taking up skilling opportunities. So I offer this as an example because it's basically a nice template for any organization. To be successful at acknowledgement and recognition, you have to do what I talked about at the beginning. You have to market to talent their opportunity for career progression and growth, and then break that down to smaller steps that can be achieved in 6 to 8 week periods of time versus half a year or a full year or even more. And these days, digital tools exist to measure performance and achievement, so you can provide recognition. You can really know who your top performers are. How do you do the recognition? How do you accomplish that? You could consider, high-tech interventions like talent profiles in your system that showcase badges, medals, and accomplishments. But it can be as simple, honestly, as a chart in a break room. It depends on your culture. I think sometimes recognition leads to unhealthy behaviors, so it can turn sour if people worry that they're not showing up on that chart in the break room, if that makes sense. It might translate to them that they're on their way out. So consider what recognition is private and what's held up in public. We talked a little bit before about how younger talent is used to this idea of transparency and teaming. So I think one of the coolest and most inclusive ways to recognize is team-based awards. How is the team performing? It's healthy, it's fun, it can build a really positive spirit of competition. But whatever you do, you want to make sure you communicate up front that you have some sort of recognition program and that you're maintaining that throughout so that you have a feeling of consistency within your organization. Lastly, just remember the digital tools to do this kind of stuff exist like they never have before. I mentioned before about diversity of talent. Art was talking about that. You know, those digital tools allow us to bring in people with English as a second language. They change the nature of work so that your interactions, you know, don't necessarily have to be, hey, can you lift 50 pounds, and thereby eliminate half of the working population. Those digital tools that allow you to be inclusive in terms of who you bring in also allow you to be really inclusive and recognize top performance in an organization. They create that transparency, and they also allow for that faster hit in terms of recognition, either of teams or of individuals.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, I mean, most of the conversation has been around creating a safe and enjoyable work environment. But now I'm curious from your comments, Rebecca, and maybe pass this over to Art. So given that manufacturers have to balance this concept of, you know, an enjoyable work environment against performance requirements, and balance perhaps rewarding good performers, identifying good performance, with also the opposite side of that balance, which is in enforcing privacy measures and not allowing those things to become punitive. Any suggestions on, if I'm the manufacturer, how do I create a balance in that, you know, with those two things?
I would say that one of the things that Rebecca was talking about was team-based performance incentives. I think those can really help, where you're not recognizing the one individual superstar who will be more like a prima donna saying, yeah, I'm the greatest, I'm the best, I'm just gonna, you know, keep my nose to the grindstone, do nothing but work, and not pay attention to my team. They may be star performers, but they're not a good team player. And I think you need to balance both of those. I think in a lot of manufacturing environments, they have, at least in a lean production facility, you have andon cords or andon boards where you can see the progress. And I think you can celebrate those gains. Yes, we hit our production quota, or you can celebrate safety. We've had zero, you know, injuries or recordable injuries, and you're marking the good behaviors that's going on. And the more you can, we have a tendency as human beings to do what we're measured on. So you want to make sure those metrics are the proper metrics for what you would consider a success of your workplace. Part of it is the bottom line, part of it is the quality, part of it is being a good place to work. But many manufacturing plants are seeing high turnover rates where people walk in and they say, wow, this is not what I expected. And they don't make the whole day or the whole week. So I've seen turnover rates almost 50, 75% that they don't last, you know, their first paycheck. They don't even get to that point of seeing whether it's a good paying job or not a good paying job, because they don't like the environment. So the more you can encourage team-based rewards, Rebecca hit on whether it's just a pizza or a donut in the break room saying, hey, you guys did great. You had wonderful, no defects, and quality was great, and the quantity was good, the profits were good, and there was no fights or no grievances. Those types of things can be rewarded, and not necessarily just with cash. Cash can be as much of a disincentive as it is an incentive.
Got it. Hey, Prasad, early in Drishti's career and Drishti's history, you made some decisions to walk away from potential deals where you recognized that the culture in the plant, maybe the relationship between management and workers was uncomfortable, maybe, you know, going to lead to an ineffective effort on our part. So I'm wondering, those must have been hard decisions. I wasn't there then when you made those, but what was critical for you? How did you arrive at those decisions to walk away from certain deals?
You know, I go back to the mission statement that we set ourselves up as a belief statement that Drishti exists to extend human potential in an increasingly automated world. And so it starts with the human being, and quite simply, having been on the floor myself over my career, there's a recognition that if the culture is not in place, in other words, it's the punitive culture that Art was referencing a few minutes ago. If I sensed that that was the case, there was a walk, because I knew that if I engaged, we would fail. And failure was not a choice. So it was as much a human decision as it was a business decision, that if I didn't have, quote, our constituents all aligned, is just an exercise in futility. So that was really what drove me to make those decisions. And I think we still do that today with you on board, because it just speaks to the centrality of the human. And I think we don't give humans credit for what they know. That the line associate knows more about the plant than the engineer and the plant manager does. And the question becomes, how do you hear their voice? And really what I was looking for was, is the voice of the person at the very bottom of that totem pole heard or not? And if it's not heard, that means there isn't a mechanism for improvement, which implies there isn't a path to success for Drishti.
Great, thanks, Prasad. So before we take audience questions, one final question to the group, which is, what practical advice do you have for manufacturers to deploy new technologies like Drishti on the factory floor? Art, I'll start with you because of your previous comments about the unions, but specifically, what can manufacturers do to engage or do this collaboratively with unions and with their workers to further everyone's objectives?
I would echo exactly what Prasad was just talking about, that the people on the line have a lot of knowledge that you need to tap into. They know what's going on. And I had a chance to interview a bunch of UAW vice presidents at different auto factories. And one of them was Don Eflin, who's no longer with us. He said, some people invest money into their company, but the line workers, they invest their life. They invest their entire life to work there. They don't go there to work for a year or two. They go there to work and they want a good, steady job and they want to be engaged. And if you as the employer or management recognize that, look, they could be here for the next 10 or 15 years and it's expensive to have them walk out the door, recognize that they have value to add, that they can help. And I think a lot of it is the attitude. Too many times we have the mentality, oh, we fix that. Well, you can never fix it. You're just temporarily addressing some of the issues you're facing at the time, but you never fix a production system, ever. You have to constantly address the issues as they pop up, and you can make it better, but it's never fixed. And you need that continuous improvement and that thought of, it's always room to be either better, safer, higher quality. There's always something you can do, and you need to keep that workforce engaged, unionized or not. The union gives you the opportunity to have structured mechanisms for people to feel safe to share their concerns. A lot of times people won't share their concerns if they think they're going to get fired for, you know, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. So they don't want to do that. And the union in many cases will be willing to bubble up some of the issues that are there, whether it's unionized or not. The union just brings them to the table to help address the issues as they come up. But that would be my 2 cents. Value the workers.
And Rebecca, I imagine as a staffing consultant, you know, using some of these maybe technologies or new approaches to onboarding staff would have a difference in your ability to recruit the right people at the right place.
Yeah, and I think with all technology, remembering it's an incredible tool for good or evil, right? It is not in and of itself good or evil. What makes the difference, I think, is it a reflection of the culture and the outcome that you want? How do you make sure as an organization that you have the culture and process that's tied to the outcomes you want to deliver? For instance, Art has given us a great basic one. The worker is valued. Their opinion is valued. Their wisdom is called forward. How do you demonstrate then that tie into the technology? So you're not just putting technology on top of bad process, bad culture, right? And if you know you're doing that, do you know what your should be process and should be culture should look like so that the technology can help unleash that? And have you made that goal clear to everyone that'll be touching it so that they're also able to help hold some mutual accountability around that? Because this can be incredibly powerful, it can be huge unlock. You just have to be mindful of what you're trying to create so you don't, you first do no harm.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. Erin, do we have audience questions?
We do. Before we get to the questions, I want to pass along Luke's apologies. He was sitting in his office when a fire alarm went off and they were asked to vacate. So I gave him permission to not burn on our behalf. He is now outside safely. He apologized for leaving in a hurry. So we have two questions. One from Victor, who is asking, and Prasad, I think this is probably best directed to you. What are your thoughts about upskilling with dual language to help fill the skills gap? And by that, I think he means using language of the native language of the worker to understand safety and quality, while also teaching them English to contribute to continuous learning. What do you think of that? And what do you think of video, maybe even circumnavigating that need?
Yeah, so let me just be sure I understood the question. The question is, what do I think about multi-language or dual language learning, and what role does video play in that? Is that a good summary?
That's great. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. The way I think about video is that it transcends language, because you don't need to translate something from English to Spanish to Mandarin with all of the attendant losses in transmission. You're just taking the raw message across. So I think there's a huge opportunity to bring new populations in. I think Art talked about bringing different groups in to drive diversity. And if you take the restrictions of language off the table, you have immigrant populations in different parts of the world that suddenly become accessible to the workforce. And if you use data, which is something we've not quite talked about yet, as an enabler, and you use video as an enabler, suddenly the languages you're talking about are video and math. It turns out many of these immigrant populations have huge strengths in those areas that we just don't know how to tap today, right? Just because I don't know English doesn't mean I don't know math, and doesn't mean I don't know how to interpret that chart that was put in front of me. In fact, I might have the better interpretation because I know what's happening on the floor and the data, and I can tell you exactly what to do. So I see these newer technologies as enabling newer parts of the workforce to come in. And at the same time, I see the technologies as a way to enable the older parts, the existing groups, to up-level themselves, to cross-skill themselves, because that's what technology is going to force us all to do. You're going to have to derive values in different ways. And if you don't keep up with that language, whether it's a data language, a spoken language, I think you fall behind. And video can become sort of the crossover point, if I can call it that.
Erin, I think we have time for one more question.
Excellent. We have one more from Jonathan. He says, specifically for Art, but for the panel in general, can you give advice on how to better work collaboratively with unions on tech like this? Like, what are the first steps you would take?
Number one, meet with them and have an open environment. Sit in a room and let's talk about it and saying, here's what we're doing. And I always recommend having some sort of flip chart or some way of documenting it and saying, this is going to be brainstorming. Let's talk about it. What are some of the issues? And you start writing some of the issues and you ask their opinions. Any ideas on how we can get past this? If you actually engage with people and talk to them, and there's a misconception that people hate change. We don't hate change. We all love change, but we only love change when it's our idea. We don't like imposed change. If I tell you, you got to change your job, change where you work, and do all that other stuff, oh no, you're tearing up my life. If we say, oh, gee, I got this great opportunity, I may go over there and I may do this, or I want to change that. If it's my idea, then I'm all for change. If you're telling me here, take it or leave it, I don't like it so much. And I think if you engage in the conversation and be open to change your path, that if the way you want to do it is the only way it can be done, and you're going to force it on somebody, you might want to open up your mind and saying, here's what I thought, but I'd really love to hear what your thoughts are on this. Here's my goal. This is the destination I want to get there. If you give me a slight detour or you jog around a different way to make it easier for the workforce to accept, then I'm willing to deviate my path as long as I get to where I need to go. So I would just say engage in an open conversation and be ready to tweak your plan to accommodate the feedback you get from the employees, unionized or not.
I'm going to extend your comment, Art, a little bit. So when we started the company, the first thing I did was we actually insisted that the line associate was a part of the rollout team, right? Because two reasons. One, there was complete transparency in what we were trying to do. But to your point a minute ago, they actually have the deviation might be the better path. It's not a deviation, actually, it's an optimal path. and it's better known to the guy on the floor than to the engineer who's trying to set a path. And so I think you're missing out on that knowledge base is a criminal activity in my mind.
All right. Well,
Excellent.
thank you, everyone. We appreciate your attendance. Gary, any last words?
No, I'm so grateful to hear your comments. I think it's been part of Prasad's vision from the beginning that this is a technology that gets deployed to enhance the workers' job experience and enjoyment in the job. So it all starts with the worker. If we can improve their environment, then we improve the factory environment at the same time.
Thank you so much, guys. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all for joining.